Not all storms arrive with thunder. Some come quietly, on soft feet. They don't rage or roar. They smile. They bring warm words, familiar gestures, and promises that feel like shelter. They sit beside you in silence, or call you dear friend. And yet, over time, something inside begins to dim, slowly, quietly, like a candle running out of air. So let me ask you, who walks beside you? Not just today, but through the seasons of your life. And more importantly, who walks with your heart in their hands? In the time of the Buddha, long before psychology named the traits we now call manipulation, codependency, emotional deception, he saw them clearly, not as enemies, not as villains, but as patterns, repeating again and again in human relationships. He named them with clarity and with compassion, because this is not a teaching about fear. It is a teaching about discernment, about seeing through the veil of charm, of flattery, of false support, about recognizing which companions truly help us grow and which quietly pull us away from our path. Tonight, we walk through these teachings together, not to judge others and not to shame ourselves, but to remember what the Buddha taught so gently, so long ago, that true friendship is not always sweet, but it is always freeing. So breathe with me. This may not be an easy truth, but it just might be the one your heart has been waiting for. Part 1. The Sweet Talker. A smile that takes more than it gives. There is a kind of person who enters your life like spring sunlight, warm, golden, seemingly nourishing. They speak your name with gentle tones. They offer gifts wrapped in silk, compliments dipped in honey, and promises laced with stars. At first they feel like the kindness you've been waiting for, but as the days pass and the words remain sweeter than the actions, something inside you begins to quietly ache. In the teachings of the Buddha, this figure is known as Mitta Patiya Paka, a false friend, not in the crude sense of betrayal, but in the subtle art of illusion. They wear the mask of care, but are animated by self-interest. Their presence is pleasant, but their essence is hollow. The Buddha described 4 signs to recognize them, preserved in the Sigalovada Sutta. They give little but take much. They help only when it suits them. They flatter when others are watching, and they divide you from those who truly care. These aren't simply bad habits. They are quiet fractures in the architecture of trust. Once, in the days when the Buddha walked barefoot through the dusty streets of Rajagaha, there lived a merchant named Ananda, not the beloved disciple, but a wealthy man known for his generosity. His storehouses overflowed with spices and cloth, but his heart was open wider still. One day, a charismatic stranger arrived, praising Ananda's wisdom and proposing a partnership that sounded too good to ignore. He spoke with the ease of rivers and smiled like the Bodhi moon. Other merchants warned him, "This man's kindness is loud only when others listen." But Ananda, touched by flattery, ignored their words. The Buddha, staying then at the Bamboo Grove Monastery, observed quietly. He did not scold Ananda, nor condemn the visitor. Instead, he offered a reflection. Sweet words may fill the ear, but empty hands tell the truth. Indeed, the stranger gave only when it was seen. He praised Ananda publicly, but vanished in moments of need. He spoke of wealth, but delayed every real step. And most dangerously, he whispered seeds of doubt into Ananda's mind. Your old friends are jealous. Only I see your true greatness. What makes this teaching profound is not just that such people exist, but that they often do not know the harm they cause. They may believe in their own stories. In the Dhammapada, the Buddha says, "The fool who knows he is a fool is wise at least in that. But the fool who thinks himself wise, he is truly a fool." You may have met someone like this. Perhaps they came into your life with light and laughter. They knew what to say, when to say it, and how to mirror your dreams. And perhaps, when you truly needed them, not to celebrate, but to sit quietly beside your sorrow, they were gone. Or worse, they used your trust to build something of their own. But here is the gentle truth. Their presence is not always an attack. It is a mirror. We crave the soft touch of affection. We hunger for recognition. And sometimes, that hunger makes us see what we wish was true. If you've been hurt by someone like this, you are not alone. Many carry this wound in silence, ashamed of having trusted too easily. But the Buddha did not teach us to close our hearts, only to open our eyes. True friendship, he said, is not measured by the gifts we receive, but by the consistency of presence. It is steady as the moon's reflection on still water. It does not vanish with time or attention. And if by chance you recognize these traits, not in others, but in yourself, do not despair. As one commenter wisely wrote, "I've been guilty of this too, but I'm working on it." The path is not about perfection, it is about awareness. A false friend outside can harm your trust, but a false friend within can harm your peace. In this life, people will walk beside you for many reasons. Some will teach you joy, some will teach you loss, and some, like the sweet talker, will teach you the delicate balance between faith and discernment. So before we move on, pause with me. Who in your life smiles often, but is absent when the light fades? And in your own heart, have you ever offered words more than presence? If the answer makes you uncomfortable, then take comfort in this. Discomfort is often where truth begins to bloom. Part 2. The Empty Promiser, a voice without a path. There is a kind of person whose presence fills the room with possibility. Their voice is smooth, confident, radiant with dreams. They speak of future triumphs, of changes just around the corner. They tell you of what they will do, who they're becoming, and what is certainly unfolding next. And somehow you find yourself believing not just them but in them. The Buddha knew this pattern long before modern psychology gave it a name. He called them Vataya Parama, those whose strength lies in speech, but not in action. In his day, these were the ones who filled royal courts and merchant halls with declarations of progress, but who rarely lifted their own hands to shape it. There is a story, often whispered among monks, of a young novice in the forests of Kosala. When he arrived, he impressed everyone with his eloquence. He spoke with passion about his path to enlightenment, claimed he would reach awakening in one moon cycle. His words inspired, his voice calmed. And yet when the bell rang for meditation, his mat was often empty. When chores called, he was planning his practice. When others sat in stillness, he spoke of inner storms too powerful to tame just yet. The Buddha observed this quietly. One day he walked past the young monk and said gently, "A blossom may be bright, but if it bears no scent, it cannot nourish the bees." This is the paradox of the empty promiser. They offer beauty and language, but the fragrance of their presence is missing. Their words are petals without roots, and yet it's easy to fall in love with them. Why? Because their promises echo our own longing. Their grand declarations awaken the dreams we ourselves fear to name, and in their certainty we feel temporarily safe, safe from the ambiguity of action, the fear of failure, the quiet labor of becoming. But here's the hidden wound over time. Their promises start to erode not just your trust in them, but your trust in the power of commitment itself. Have you ever waited on someone who kept saying, "I'll change, just not yet"? Or worked alongside a colleague who was always planning, always proposing, but never delivering? Or have you been this person, speaking of what you'll build, what you'll heal, what you'll pursue, Yet months pass, and little moves. In the Anguttara Nikaya, the Buddha said, "One who speaks of the path but does not walk. It is like a traveler who carries a map but never takes a step." There is something deeper here, though. The empty promiser is often not a liar. They are a prisoner of their own fantasy. Speaking of the future gives a taste of achievement without enduring its cost. It is a subtle addiction to the feeling of transformation, not the reality of it. And still, the path of compassion remains. If you know someone like this, do not harden your heart. They may not see the chain they're caught in, but offer them presence, not participation. Listen, but don't wait. Encourage, but don't enable. And above all, don't hand your peace to someone still searching for theirs. If you recognize this pattern in yourself, let go of shame. The Buddha never mocked human inconsistency. He illuminated it. Awareness is enough to begin again. Perhaps you've made promises you didn't keep. Perhaps you've told yourself, "Tomorrow I'll meditate," or "Next week I'll slow down." And yet, the dishes pile up. The scroll continues. The mind races. But remember this: the smallest step taken is worth more than the loudest intention declared. Let it be quiet. Let it be humble. But let it begin. So now I ask you, not out of judgment, but with the stillness of the Sangha, what have you promised yourself, but have not yet honored? And what would happen if, just today, you took one step, even if no one saw? Part 3. The secret enemy. The hand that holds, then hurts. There is a kind of betrayal that makes no sound. No door slams. No voice rises. It does not arrive with anger, nor depart with clarity. It lives quietly behind shared laughter and familiar gestures. It knows your favorite tea, your old wounds, your unspoken fears, and it uses that knowing not to heal, but to harm. The Buddha called this figure Papamita, the bad friend, or more precisely, the secret enemy. He does not attack from the front, but from the inside. His smile is real, his concern is soft, but behind it all there is a silent corrosion, jealousy wrapped in care, resentment dressed as advice. In a time long ago, in the town of Savatthi, there lived a merchant's son named Vedika. He was known for his generosity and sharp mind, and by his side since childhood was a companion he trusted like breath. They had studied under the same teacher, laughed through the same festivals, and wept at the same funerals. To Vedika, this friend was more than a brother. He was memory itself. But memory cannot always shield us from what the present conceals. As Vedika's fortunes rose, the other's bitterness bloomed silently. It was not dramatic, nor conscious at first, just a quiet discomfort at every compliment Vedika received, a twitch of pain when his friend was praised, a tightening jaw when Vedika laughed a little too freely. And so it began, not with a strike, but with a whisper. "He trusts too easily," the friend would say to others. "He's losing touch," he'd suggest to partners. "He needs guidance." He'd confide to Vedika himself, gently, always gently. The Buddha, hearing of Vedika's distress, shared a simple truth. Not all who walk with you walk for you. The poison closest to the heart spreads quickest. This is what makes the secret enemy so difficult to detect. They do not oppose you directly. Instead, they mirror your vulnerabilities, step into your confidences, and seed small doubts about others, about yourself, about your path. In the Anguttara Nikaya, the Buddha listed 4 signs of such a person. They rejoice when you fall, but pretend to mourn. They minimize your success with subtle concern. They betray your secrets under the guise of seeking help. They study your weakness, not to protect, but to exploit. Have you ever felt unsettled after sharing something dear with someone close, without knowing why? Have you ever noticed a friend who disappears when you're doing well, but reappears when you're uncertain? Have you ever felt doubted, but couldn't explain why? The danger of the secret enemy is not just what they do, it's how they make you feel. You begin to question your memory, your intuition, even your goodness. That erosion is quiet but deep. And often by the time we see clearly, the damage has already reshaped our hearts. But here's the deeper teaching. The Buddha never taught fear. He taught awareness with compassion. He reminded us that even those who betray do so often from their own pain. The secret enemy in their heart is often a wounded friend who never learned to grieve properly, never learned to ask for love without comparison. So what can we do? We do not need to hate them. We do not need to confront them with rage. But we must let go of illusions. We must see clearly. To love someone does not mean to be blind to their harm. And to walk away does not mean we are cruel. It means we value peace. And if by chance you recognize a shadow of this pattern in yourself, some quiet envy, some masked resentment, do not turn away. See it gently. Breathe into it. You do not need to wear the mask any longer. As Zen Master Ryokan once said, "When I look deeply into my own heart, I find the whole world reflected there." So pause with me. Who in your life knows your soft places and has quietly made them weaker? And have you ever held another's trust in your hand, then let it slip for the sake of your own pain? In silence, ask, am I walking beside those who nourish my wholeness, or feeding shadows I dare not name? Part 4. The Enabler, the gentle voice that holds you back. Not all harm arrives wrapped in malice. Some come with warm smiles, soft tones and open arms. They offer you comfort when you stumble, tell you it's okay to let go of the discipline, the effort, the promise you once made to your higher self. They are not cruel, they do not manipulate, but slowly, tenderly, they begin to cradle you into decline. In the Buddha's teachings, this person is known as Apayasahaya, literally, one who supports the fall, not with weapons or lies, but with misplaced kindness. Their danger lies in what they enable us to believe, that staying where we are is good enough, that growth is optional, that truth should never be uncomfortable. There is an old story from the monasteries of Magadha about a young monk named Channa. He was gentle, beloved, always ready, with a kind word and an extra portion of food. He was the type who would help others with their robes, make tea for the elder monks, and offer small comforts during the harsh rains. But Channa also had a weakness. He avoided discipline, skipped meditation, and often broke the minor rules of monastic life. The troubling part was not his behavior. It was his circle. His friends, also monks, always comforted him. "You needed the rest," they would say, when he overslept. "You're only human," when he skipped chanting. "Practice isn't supposed to be stressful," they reminded him when he avoided sitting with his own thoughts. One stormy night, while most monks remained in stillness despite the thunder, Channa curled under his blanket. The next morning, the Buddha asked him one question, not in anger, but in deep calm. "Channa, is the path to awakening meant to be comfortable or true?" That question cut through all his excuses, because beneath every comfort his friends had offered, he knew he had stopped growing. This is the paradox of the enabler. Their compassion is sincere, but misplaced. Instead of supporting our strength, they protect our weakness, not out of harm, but because they too are afraid of pain, of confrontation, of change. Their kindness becomes a cushion that slowly muffles our calling. You may have someone like this in your life, the friend who tells you to skip responsibilities just this once, The loved one who says you've already done enough, when deep down, you know you're holding back. Or even the partner who lets your unhealthy patterns repeat without challenge because they fear hurting you or losing you. Worse, you may have become this person. Have you ever told someone what they wanted to hear rather than what they needed? Have you ever stayed silent to avoid discomfort while watching someone you love repeat the same wounds? Have you ever called it support when it was really fear of being rejected? In the Dhammapada, the Buddha teaches, better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace. Sometimes peace begins not in comforting someone, but in gently, lovingly awakening them. Letting someone decline because we fear upsetting them is not love. It is attachment disguised as compassion. True love, true friendship, is not always soft. Sometimes it must stand firm like a mountain. Sometimes it must say, I see your pain, but I will not let you sink into it. This applies to ourselves too. We all carry an inner enabler, the voice that says, just rest, when what we really need is to face what's hard. The voice that says, you've earned this escape, when what we really need is discipline. And we must meet that voice with tenderness, but also with truth, because healing is not always easy. Growth is not always pleasant, but it is always sacred. Before we move on, pause, look at your relationships. Who affirms your comfort, but not your calling? And in your own speech, are you a mirror that reflects truth, or a pillow that hides it? And perhaps most quietly of all, where in your own life have you let comfort become a cage? Part 5. A mirror before we judge. It's easy to look outward, to point a finger toward the sweet talker who seduced us with praise, to recall the empty promiser who filled our life with glittering futures that never came, to name the secret enemy whose smile hid 1,000 fractures, to withdraw from the enabler who rocked us gently into forgetting ourselves. And sometimes that looking is necessary. It protects, it awakens. But the Buddha, in his infinite compassion, never let his disciples stay at the surface. He always returned them, gently, steadily, to the heart. There's a quiet teaching in the Udana where the Buddha says, not by speech alone does one become wise. The wise one is he who sees both others and himself. And so now we must ask a question that many fear. What if I have been these people? What if, in moments I have forgotten my clarity, I too have charmed to gain, promised without grounding, envied in silence, or enabled someone I love to drift? The answers, dear friend, may not be easy, but they are the beginning of true freedom. I remember a woman who came to one of our silent retreats years ago, elderly, gentle, with a kindness that drew people in like firelight. After a Dharma talk on this very topic, she approached me and whispered through tears, I always thought I was the wounded one, but now I see how I have wounded others in the name of love. She had raised a daughter with deep affection, but also with control. She had praised her, but only when it suited her idea of success. She had protected her from pain, but also from growth. And suddenly, all the roles in the Buddha's teaching were not separate people in her life. They were facets of herself. I did not tell her to feel shame. I told her to bow, because awareness is a sacred threshold. To see ourselves, truly, is to step out of the dream of self-righteousness and into the field of humility where real transformation grows. You see, none of these 4 types are villains. They are shadows of the human experience. They arise when we forget our wholeness, when we move from fear or hunger or longing. And that means we all carry seeds of them. When we flatter to be liked, the sweet talker stirs. When we talk more about change than live it, the empty promiser smiles. When we envy quietly, the secret enemy breathes. When we comfort someone to avoid conflict, the enabler leans in. But here is where Buddhist wisdom gently lifts us. We are not fixed beings. We are rivers, not stones. The moment we see, we can choose again. The moment we acknowledge, we can bow. And the moment we bow, we return to the path. Not perfect, but honest. In the Dhammapada, it is said, "As a solid rock is not shaken by the wind, so the wise are not shaken by blame or praise." Perhaps the deeper teaching is not to obsess over who has hurt us, but to learn how not to become them in return. Perhaps the truest discernment is the ability to hold the mirror, not only outward, but inward, with gentleness, with humor, and with grace. So pause here. Let judgment soften. Let the walls between them and me dissolve just a little. Ask yourself, in my search for connection, have I ever reached out with expectation instead of love? In my desire to help, have I ever held someone back? And in the still corners of my heart, what stories am I still telling to avoid seeing clearly? Part 6. The practice of choosing again. After the mirror clears, after the masks are named, and after the stories fall silent, what remains? A choice. Not a dramatic one, not the kind that shakes mountains or turns tides, but a quiet, steady kind of choice, the kind that remakes a life from the inside out. Because once we've seen, once we've named the sweet talker, the empty promiser, the secret enemy, and the gentle enabler, both out there and within, the path forward is no longer about judgment. It becomes about discernment. The Buddha never taught us to exile others from our lives. He taught us to see clearly, and with clear seeing comes freedom, not the freedom to push people away, but the freedom to choose how close they stand to your peace. In the Mangala Sutta, one of the Buddha's most beloved discourses, he lists not associating with fools and associating with the wise as the very first blessings of a life well lived. Not fame, not riches, not good fortune, but the company we keep. Because our circle is not just social, it is spiritual. The people closest to us are like the wind beneath a flame. They can either fan it brighter or blow it out. And so we begin again, not with fear but with mindfulness. Look around your life. Who shows up when no one is watching? Who celebrates you quietly, without need for recognition? Who challenges you gently when you drift from your path? These are your true companions. Keep them close. And just as importantly, look within. When do you speak only to be heard? When do you hold someone back under the name of protection? When do you trade honesty for comfort? These are not failures. These are invitations. To be human is to forget and remember, again and again. The path is not a straight line. It is a spiral, always returning, but never to the same place. As Zen Master Dogen once wrote, "To study the way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self, and to forget the self is to be awakened by all things." This too is awakening, not in caves or temples alone, but in how you choose your relationships, in how you speak, in how you forgive, in how you walk away or stay with presence. You do not need to carry old patterns simply because they are familiar. You do not need to stay loyal to people who only feed your shadows. And you do not need to be the person you were yesterday. The path is always here. So as we close this journey, the stories, the masks, the teachings, I offer no instruction. Only one question: if the company you keep does not lead you toward wisdom, compassion, and truth, where exactly is it leading you? Take this moment, breathe, and choose again. Not from fear, not from anger, but from love. The kind that says, I am ready to walk with truth. I am ready to be surrounded by light. I am ready to become it. And now, we return to stillness. You've listened deeply, not just to stories of others, but to echoes within yourself. You've walked through the quiet corridors of trust and betrayal, comfort and clarity. And if somewhere along the way your breath caught, your heart ached, or your eyes softened, then know this: you are not alone. Every one of us at some point has mistaken noise for kindness, promises for truth, or comfort for love. But in the Buddha's wisdom, we are reminded, again and again, that the path is never about being perfect. It is about being awake. So take what you've heard tonight, not as a warning, but as an invitation to see more clearly, to walk more gently, and to choose again, not from fear, but from love, a deeper kind of love, the kind that doesn't just feel good, but frees you. Let go of those who cloud your light. Draw near to those who nourish your spirit, and become, in someone else's life, the kind of presence that heals by simply being true. As the Buddha once said, the wise grow in the company of the wise. May you find such company. May you become it. Until next time, stay mindful, stay wise, and walk in peace.